My father raised his glass to 80 guests and pointed it straight at me. For 35 years, I had begged this family for one kind word. And instead, he smiled and announced that my sister was inheriting the $230 million company. "You're lucky I still let you use my name," he said. My mother laughed. I set down my glass and walked out. The next morning, a lawyer opened a stranger's wallet on my kitchen table, and my own baby photo looked back at me. The feedback screech made half the ballroom wince, but Winston Mercer, 69 and commanding every room he'd entered for 40 years, just smiled and waited for silence. The Omaha Country Club had hosted our family's anniversary celebration for as long as I could remember, 20 years of Gallagher Mercer construction. The company my father built with his business partner into something worth $350 million. I was 35. I'd spent 12 years as a senior claims adjuster, trained to find the places where stories and evidence stopped matching. I should have seen it coming. "My daughter, Valentina," Winston said, turning to gesture at the young woman in wine-colored silk 2 tables away, "inherits the company, $350 million. Valentina Mercer, 31, and polished in a way I'd never managed, smiled with practiced grace. She'd appeared at my shoulder earlier that evening, smelling of expensive perfume and entitlement, asking if I was excited for the big announcement. I'd thought he meant the company milestone. Winston turned to me then. The microphone picked up every word. "You're lucky I still let you use the name," he said. Most men would have cut it years ago. Frances Mercer, my mother, sat in pearls and navy as she always did, hands folded, as if at a recital she'd rehearsed her whole life. Her laugh carried across the ballroom, bright, practiced, the sound of a woman who'd been waiting 35 years to make it. What do you call the moment when your family erases you in front of everyone who matters, and your mother laughs like it's the punchline she's been holding back since you were born? I looked at Vernon Gallagher at table 3. 69, and weathered by the illness everyone pretended not to notice. He sat with untouched champagne and white knuckles gripping the tablecloth. He half rose from his chair, mouth opening like he might object. Then he sank back down and stared at the centerpiece. The ballroom had gone quiet in the way rooms do, when everyone's pretending they didn't just witness something cruel. 80 people who'd watched me grow up, who'd nodded politely at family gatherings, who'd asked about my work analyzing fire insurance claims as if they cared. They looked at their plates now. They adjusted their napkins. They became fascinated by the ice sculpture melting near the bar. Document, preserve, exit, I told myself. The same 3 words I used at every scene that didn't make sense yet. I set down my champagne untouched, like Vernon's, and stood. My coat was at coat check, but I didn't wait for the attendant to retrieve it. I walked the length of the ballroom in my black dress and sensible heels, past the ice sculpture and the string quartet, and the table where Valentina sat with her inheritance, past my mother's pearls and my father's microphone, past Vernon, who wouldn't look at me. 80 people watched the unloved daughter leave her own family's celebration. I knew because I counted footsteps, not faces. 47 steps from my table to the exit. Evidence people count things when the feelings get too large. The March night was cold enough to need that coat I'd left behind. The valet, maybe 20 years old with kind eyes, brought my car around and held the door with the sort of careful concern that meant he'd been standing close enough to hear. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked. "Loon party," I said. "If you've ever been told you were lucky, just to keep a name that never wanted you, You know what I felt in that parking lot. I tipped him $40 because he'd asked if I was okay, and because I couldn't think of anything else to do with my hands. I drove home on muscle memory. My apartment in downtown Omaha was small and practical, and mine paid for with 12 years of evidence analysis and weekend overtime. No family money. No inheritance. Just mine. I sat on the couch, still wearing my coat, still holding my purse, still trying to process what had just happened in front of everyone I'd ever known. I'd spent 12 years reading fire scenes, learning how to walk through wreckage and catalog what burned. I knew how to be methodical when everything was ash, but this was different. This was watching your father hold a match to your life and announce it to a room full of witnesses. At 11:42, my phone lit up on the coffee table. Local number. I didn't recognize it. One ring. Not even a full one, just the front edge of sound. Then silence. No voicemail. No text. Just that truncated ring hanging in my empty apartment like a question I couldn't answer yet. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Unknown number. 11:42 on a Saturday night. The worst night of my life, and somebody's thumb had slipped. Wrong number. Had to be. I was an evidence person telling myself a story. The phone stayed dark in my hand. I pulled up the recent calls list and stared at that unknown number until my vision blurred. Someone had dialed me at 11:42 on the night my father publicly disowned me in front of 80 witnesses and then hung up before I could answer. Wrong number, I told myself, but I saved it anyway. Because evidence people don't believe in coincidences. We believe in patterns. And this, the announcement, the timing, the single ring felt like the start of something I didn't understand yet. By morning, I would know I was right. The knock came at 9 on Sunday morning. 2 knocks, evenly spaced. The knock of a man billing by the hour. I was still wearing yesterday's dress. Hadn't slept. I'd spent the night staring at that unknown number, telling myself it was coincidence. Except evidence people don't believe in coincidences the same night their fathers disown them. Through the peephole. A man in a charcoal overcoat, silver hair, maybe 60, holding a leather briefcase, older than I was. Ms. Mercer, he said through the door. My name is Preston Whitfield. I'm an attorney. I apologize for the hour and for the day. I didn't open the door. What firm? Whitfield and Associates, Estate Law. I represent a client who needs to speak with you. About what? Something that can't wait any longer. I pulled up the Nebraska State Bar website. Preston Whitfield, licensed since 1989. Estate planning, probate. Trust administration. Office in the Old Market District. Photo matched. I opened the door. Preston Whitfield had the calm of a man who billed by the hour and never rushed. He nodded once, waited for me to speak first. You said estate law, I said. Nobody in my family is dead. I'm not here about last night, he said. I'm here about a night 35 years ago. Not about last night. About 35 years ago. I stepped back and let him in. I sat at my kitchen table when I gestured to it, set the briefcase down carefully. Coffee? I asked. No, thank you. He opened the briefcase and removed a single item. A clear plastic evidence sleeve, the kind I used for fire investigations. Inside was a leather wallet, brown and worn, the kind men carried in the 80s. He laid it on the table between us. My client kept this for 35 years, Preston said. That's why we're here. I didn't touch it. Who's your client? Someone who can't reveal themselves yet, but who needs you to know they exist. Preston opened the sleeve carefully, handling it the way I handled evidence. He unfolded the wallet. Inside, in the small plastic window yellowed now, the kind they don't make anymore, was a photograph, a baby. Maybe 3 days old, wrapped in a hospital blanket with pink and blue stripes. I knew that baby. I'd seen the photo once in a box my mother kept labeled Saskia, infancy. The same blanket, the same tiny fist, the same me. My client was at the hospital, Preston said quietly. Before your father was. That's not possible. My voice sounded far away. My mother went into labor early, visiting my grandmother 2 hours away. My father drove through the night. Your father arrived at 6:37 in the morning, Preston said. My client was there at 4:15. Who keeps a stranger's baby photo in their wallet for 35 years unless the baby isn't a stranger at all? Who is your client? I asked again. Preston folded his hands on the table. Someone who has very good reasons for waiting this long. And as of last night, ran out of reasons to wait any longer. Last night, the announcement, the humiliation, the phone call at 11:42. That was you, I said. The call. You hung up. My client wanted to be sure you were home. Alone. That you'd had time to process what happened. Preston's face showed nothing. My client said you'd verify everything independently before agreeing to anything. And if any part of this connects to your father's company, you'll find the seam, because finding seams is your profession. He stood. Left the wallet on the table in its plastic sleeve. This was always yours, he said. My client just kept it safe. I haven't agreed to meet anyone. No, Preston said. You haven't. But you will, because you're the kind of person who needs to know why someone carried your photograph for 35 years while you grew up invisible. I walked to the door, then turned back. Paper is only as honest as the people feeding it, Ms. Mercer. I suspect you knew that before I did. He left his business card on the counter. Plain white, raised lettering. Preston Whitfield, estate attorney. A phone number. An office in the Old Market District where old money kept its secrets. I sat alone at my kitchen table with a 35-year-old wallet containing a photograph of myself as a newborn. I opened a file on myself the way I'd opened 1,000 files on strangers, except this time, I was the house that burned and the story that didn't match. I took a manila folder from my desk and wrote on the tab in black marker, Origin. Someone had carried my face in their wallet every day for 35 years, while I grew up invisible in my own house. Someone who was at the hospital before Winston. Someone who had run out of reasons to wait. By Sunday afternoon, I would know whether Preston Whitfield was exactly who he said he was, or whether the morning after my family erased me, I had let a professional liar into my apartment. Either way, I was opening the file. I didn't cry, and I didn't call the number. Preston left, I did what I do. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, with the wallet still in its plastic sleeve beside me, and I verified. Nebraska State Bar Association. Website first. Preston Whitfield. Licensed 1993. No disciplinary actions. Current standing active. Estate planning, probate, trust administration. Photograph matched the man who'd stood in my doorway. I cross-referenced the firm. Whitfield and Associates, 412 South 11th Street, Old Market District. Real address. I pulled it up on Street View brick building. Brass plaque. The kind of place that charged by the quarter hour and never advertised. Phone number matched. 3 associate attorneys, all licensed, all verifiable. I ran his name through federal court. 2 probate cases in the last year. Both closed. both routine. Nothing suspicious. I'd deposed liars for 12 years. I knew the difference between a performance and credentials that survived verification. Preston Whitfield was exactly who he said he was, which meant the wallet was real, which meant someone had been carrying my face for 35 years. There are moments when your training saves you not from the truth, but from collapsing under it before you've documented everything. I took notes in the origin file. Date, time, Preston's visit, credentials verified. The baby photo still in the sleeve on my table. At 2:30, I called my mother. I kept it Sunday light. How was she feeling after the party? Did she get home okay? Was Dad still upset I'd left early? Frances answered in her careful voice, the one she used when neighbors might be listening. We're fine, sweetheart. Your father's disappointed, but he'll get over it. Good, I said. Hey, quick question, what hospital was I actually born in? Somebody at work is doing one of those ancestry things. 2 seconds of silence, not long. Just long enough for me to count it. Camden Valley Medical Center, sweetheart, Frances said, her voice smoothing back to normal. Don't you remember the story? I went into labor early at Grandma Lorraine's. She was newly widowed and not doing well. Your father drove through mountain snow all night. The story I'd heard 100 times. Right, I said. Camden Valley. Thanks, Mom. Why are you asking about this now? Frances's voice had an edge I recognized. Just work stuff. Ancestry research. Your father expects an apology, Saskia. That's the only paperwork this family needs. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. 3 minutes, 41 seconds. 2 seconds of silence before she answered. A 2-second pause on a phone call is like water damage on a ceiling. By the time you see it, the rot's been spreading for months. I wrote it in the origin file. Mother called 2:30 p.m. Asked about birth hospital. Camden Valley Medical Center. 2-second pause before answering. Mentioned Grandma Lorraine. Widowed. Mountain snow. Story unchanged. I didn't know what the pause meant yet, but I knew it meant something. At 9:52 that night, my phone buzzed. Text message. Valentina, whatever you're digging for, stop embarrassing the family. I read it 4 times. I had told no one. Not Leora at work. Not a friend. Not a soul. I had made exactly 1 phone call to my mother, asking what hospital I was born in. Between 2:30 and 9:52. Somewhere in those 7 hours, my mother had called Valentina, had told her I was asking about hospitals, had coordinated. If you've ever asked your mother one innocent question and had your entire family mobilize against you within hours, you know the exact moment you stop being paranoid and start being right. I took a screenshot of Valentina's text, added it to the origin file with a timestamp. Then I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the evidence. Preston's business card, the wallet in its plastic sleeve, the baby photo, the screenshot of my sister's warning. Somewhere between my mother's kitchen and my sister's thumbs, a wire ran that I couldn't see. Not a literal wire, but a system, a protocol. An understanding that when Saskia asks questions, everybody gets told. I wasn't investigating a wallet anymore. I was investigating my family, and they already knew. I pulled the laptop back and searched Camden Valley Medical Center. Small regional hospital 2 hours west, established 1967. Primarily maternity and emergency services. Still operating. Public records would be at the county clerk's office. Birth certificates, hospital admissions, all archived and indexed. I could drive there Thursday. Take a personal day. 2 hours there, maybe 3 hours searching records. 2 hours back. Home by dinner with proof of whatever my mother had paused 2 seconds to decide how to lie about, I put the phone face down and looked at the photo in the plastic sleeve one more time. The family I'd spent 35 years trying to please had just shown me their hand. They weren't ignoring my questions. They were coordinating against them, which meant there was something to coordinate against. Preston's client had been at the hospital before Winston, had carried my photo for 35 years, had waited until the night my father publicly erased me to reach out, and my family, within 7 hours of me asking one innocent question, had mobilized to make sure I stopped looking. By Thursday, I would drive 2 hours to the county records office and discover exactly what my mother had been hiding in a 2-second pause and a practiced story about mountain snow. But tonight, I just sat with the evidence and let myself feel it. I wasn't the problem daughter anymore. I was the investigator, and they were the scene. Monday at lunch, I walked over to Leora Prescott's desk with a request I couldn't fully explain. Leora was 42. A forensic data analyst in our department who could find records that other people swore didn't exist. We'd worked parallel investigations for 5 years, me on the fire scenes, her on the digital paper trails. She looked up from her salad when I approached, reading glasses halfway down her nose. "I need to find where old hospital records ended up," I said. "Camden Valley Medical, closed 2011. Birth records from March 1991. Leora set down her fork. "You want me to ask why, or you want me to just run it?" "Just run it." She pulled up the medical records transfer database, typed for maybe 90 seconds. Camden Valley went under during the recession. County absorbed the records. She clicked twice more. Buffalo County Records Office. Kearney, Nebraska, 2 hours west of here. Kearney. Not West Virginia. Not anywhere near a grandmother. Leora looked at me over her glasses. "Why would your mother drive 2 hours west to give birth?" "That's what I'm going to find out," I said. I went back to my desk and pulled up a map. Kearney sat 2 hours west of Omaha on Highway 80, a town of 30,000 people, with a state college and not much else. The family story claimed Frances went into early labor, visiting Grandma Lorraine in West Virginia. East, not west. Mountain snow, heroic drive, all of it. But the hospital where I was born was in Kearney. Women don't accidentally end up 2 hours from home when they're 9 months pregnant. They go there. They plan it. They pay for it. I took Thursday and Friday off. 13 years without using sick days buys you an unquestioned long weekend. Thursday morning, I drove west on Highway 80 with coffee and an empty stomach. 2 hours of flat Nebraska prairie. Exit signs for towns I'd never visited. Rest stops where truckers idled in the early light. Buffalo County Records Office. Sat in a municipal building that looked like it had been built in 1974 and painted once since. I walked in at 9:15 with my driver's license and a story about genealogy research. Eleanor Hayes, a county records clerk around 60 with reading glasses on a beaded chain, brightened when I explained I needed Camden Valley birth records from 1991. "Camden Valley closed in 2011, she said, leading me to a back room lined with filing cabinets. "Everything came here on pallets. You're lucky it's a birth they kept those forever." She pulled a ledger from a cabinet marked 1991, flipped to March, ran her finger down entries until she found it. "Tierney, Frances, March 12th, baby girl." She handed me a photocopied admission form in a clear sleeve. I sat at the research table and read it. Patient, Tierney, Frances, not Mercer. Tierney. Her maiden name, address, Rural Route 2. Kearney, Nebraska. Not Omaha. Not anywhere I'd ever heard my mother mention. Admission date: March 12, 1991, 6:47 p.m. Payment method: cash, 847. Cash. Where insurance should be is never an accident. Cash is what you use when you're paying for silence along with the service. Emergency contact: L. Tierney, mother. Not Raymond Mercer, husband. Not Winston. Just L. Tierney. Insurance: none listed. Winston's company had offered group health coverage since 1989. I knew because I'd verified it in a file search Monday night, cross-referencing employee benefits against years of employment. Frances would have been covered. Should have been covered. But she'd paid cash and listed her maiden name and put down her mother as emergency contact, as if Winston Mercer didn't exist. I sat with that admission form in my hands, and the thing that broke me wasn't the maiden name or the cash. It was the empty line where a husband's name should have been, as if Winston Mercer had never existed at all. "You okay, hon?" Eleanor asked from her desk. "Do you have visitor logs from that night?" I asked. Eleanor looked up, considering. Hospital kept those separate. "Let me check." She pulled another ledger from the shelf. This one bound in green cloth, pages yellowed at the edges. She set it on the table in front of me. Visitor logs, March 1991, organized by date. "You want the 12th? Please." She flipped pages, found the entry, slid the book across to me. March 12, 1991. Sat open on the table between us. Sign-in sheets, handwritten, the kind hospitals used before everything went digital. Names and times and patient room numbers, all in different handwriting, all faded now to the color of old tea. I knew before I looked that someone's name would be in there. Someone who'd signed in before Winston. Someone who had a reason to keep a baby photo in their wallet for 35 years. "Anything else you need?" Eleanor asked. I stared at the page. "Just a minute," I said. The log sat open in front of me. March 12, 1991. The night I was born. The night Frances checked into a hospital 2 hours from home, under her maiden name, paid cash, and didn't list her husband. The night someone came to visit before Winston ever arrived. The name on that visitor log would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family. I just had to look down and read it. The visitor log lay open in front of me, pages yellowed to the color of old tea. Eleanor must have seen something in my face the way I'd gone still, the way my hands had flattened on the table like I was bracing for impact. "You okay, hun?" she asked. I nodded without looking up. Eleanor pulled a chair over and sat across from me, adjusting her reading glasses. Back then, they were strict about the bands. One for mom, one for baby, one for whoever she designated. Numbers had to match, or you didn't get through the nursery doors. Designated, I repeated. Support person. Husband, usually. Sometimes a sister or a mother. Whoever the patient wanted to hold the baby when she couldn't. Eleanor tapped the log. "You looking for your dad's name?" I'd seen the band in Preston's wallet. Faded, tea-colored, sized for an adult wrist. Number visible through the plastic. 014. "I'm looking for whoever was there," I said. Eleanor nodded and stood, giving me space. "Take your time. Holler if you need anything." I turned to March 12, 1991. The page was divided into columns. Time in, visitor name, relationship, band number, time out. Handwritten entries in blue and black ink, some neat, some rushed. All faded now to varying shades of gray. I ran my finger down the page. Morning births. Afternoon visits. Husbands signing in at lunch. Grandmothers arriving after work. Then, halfway down the page, slanted handwriting in black ink. Fine 16 p.m. V. Gallagher. Family. Band 0.4. The timeout column was blank. He'd signed in at 9:14 and never signed out. Stayed the whole night. I stared at the name until the letters stopped making sense and reformed into something else, a pattern, a truth, a thing I'd known somewhere in my body since Saturday night when Vernon Gallagher half rose from table 3 with white knuckles and untouched champagne. There are facts that arrive in your body before your brain. The way your hands go cold when you read the one line that changes everything you thought you knew about who you are. Find what you need? Eleanor asked from her desk. Whoever he was, I said, my voice sounding far away. He signed in at 9:14 and never signed out. Eleanor came over, looked at the entry. Family band. That means your mama designated him. He could hold you, feed you if they let him, stay in the nursery. Same as a father. Same as a father. The band number matched. 14. The same number I'd seen through the plastic sleeve on my kitchen table. V. Gallagher. Vernon Gallagher. Winston's business partner. 40% of Gallagher Mercer Construction. The man who checked the math while Winston shook hands. The quiet one who showed up to groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, but never to barbecues, never to Christmas parties, never to birthdays after I turned 18. The man who vanished from my life the year I became an adult. At table 3. Saturday night, he'd half risen when Winston said my name, not shock, recognition. Horror at what was about to happen and no power to stop it. I was at the hospital before my father was. Family, the ledger said. Line 16. At night in a hospital 2 hours from Omaha, wearing a band with a number that matched mine. Holding me while Francis slept or didn't sleep, while Winston drove through darkness toward a wife and a baby that might not even be his. What do you do when the man who built half your father's empire was in the delivery room the night you were born while your father was still driving through the dark? Can I get copies of these? I asked Eleanor. Which pages? The admission sheet and this page, the visitor log. Eleanor took them to the copier in the corner, came back with 2 pages stamped with the Buffalo County seal. She slid them across the table. Whatever you're looking for, she said gently. I hope you find peace with it. I took the copies. My hands were steady. Thank you, I said. I walked to my car in the municipal parking lot and sat with the engine off, staring at the photocopies on my passenger seat. Patient, Tierney, Francis. Payment, cash. Emergency contact, L. Tierney. Visitor, V. Gallagher. Family, band 0.4. Timeout, blank. Vernon Gallagher had been there before Winston. He'd worn a family band, the band Francis designated. The band that gave him access. The band that said he belonged there when my legal father didn't. He'd held me for however long they let him. Hours, maybe. Long enough to take a photo through the plastic bassinet window, or ask a nurse to snap one with a disposable camera. Long enough to memorize my face. And then he'd vanished from my life for 35 years while I grew up in his business partner's house, invisible and unwanted, the daughter Winston never claimed and Vernon never acknowledged. Until Saturday night, when Winston announced my erasure in front of 80 witnesses and Vernon finally ran out of reasons to wait. I pulled out Preston's business card and dialed. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Mercer, I know his name, I said. Your client. I know who he is. Preston was quiet for 3 seconds. Vernon Gallagher, I said. He was at the hospital the night I was born. He wore band 0.4 and signed in as family and never signed out. Yes, Preston said simply. The word landed like a door closing on my old life and opening on something else entirely. I'd like to meet him, I said. Preston was quiet on the other end of the line for 3 seconds that felt like hours. He'd like to meet you, Preston said finally. If you're willing. When? Whenever you're ready. He's been waiting 35 years. He said a few more days won't matter, but they would. I could hear it in Preston's voice, the careful neutrality of a man delivering information he wished he didn't have to deliver. Saturday, I said. Tell him Saturday, March 22nd. He'll be waiting. Preston gave me directions to a house on Lake McConaughey, 3 hours northwest. A brown cabin on a slope above the water. Green metal roof. He'd see my car coming from a mile away. I drove home from Kearney in silence. No radio, just the sound of tires on asphalt and my own breathing. There are conversations you rehearse for years in your head. And then the moment arrives, and every word you practiced dissolves, leaving only the truth. I was driving 3 hours to meet a man who might be my father. Saturday morning came cold and clear. I left Omaha at 7 with coffee I didn't drink and directions I'd already memorized. 3 hours northwest on Highway 26. Past farms and wind turbines and towns, so small they were just grain elevators and a gas station. The lake appeared on the horizon like a mirage blue water where water shouldn't be. Man-made reservoir in the middle of the plains. The cabin sat on a slope above the north shore. Brown wood, green metal roof, smoke rising from a chimney. A truck in the gravel drive older model, maintained carefully. The kind a man keeps running because he likes fixing things. I parked and sat with the engine off, staring at the front door. It opened before I reached it. Vernon Gallagher stood on the deck in jeans and a flannel shirt. 69, and weathered thin by something more than age. Gray hair, careful posture, hands that trembled slightly when he lowered them to his sides. We looked at each other for a long moment. I had green-gray eyes, the exact shade of the ones I saw in the mirror. Every morning, we had the same eyes. Exactly. "Hi, kiddo," he said, barely above a whisper. I climbed the steps to the deck. Up close, I could see the left-sided tilt at the corner of his eyes, the way they narrowed when he tried not to cry. I had the same tilt, the same narrowing. "How long have you known?" I asked. Vernon gestured to 2 Adirondack chairs facing the water. "Since before you did. That's the whole problem." We sat. The worn chair for him, the newer one for me, newer wood, but weathered by years of waiting, as if he'd bought it decades ago and left it empty. The lake stretched out in front of us, glass smooth in the morning stillness. "June 1990, Vernon said. Winston was in Alaska for 11 months, supervising the pipeline subcontract. Your mother and I were 2 lonely people being careless. We knew it by morning." I didn't look at me, just stared at the water. "I'm not going to dress it up for you," he said. "You deserve the actual size of it. One night, one mistake, and then you." And Winston came home in March, walked into that hospital room, and found me still holding you. He knew before I said a word, didn't need 40 years of partnership to work it out. He just raised you as his, and made sure you felt every day that you didn't measure up. Vernon's hands tightened on the chair arms. "I should have fought," he said. "I should have claimed you. But Winston made me a deal that night, and Francis begged me to take it. Pay for the silence, stay away completely, let him raise you as his." And Winston had the money, The name, the stability. I had a construction company and a bachelor's life. So I took the deal and watched you grow up invisible. The wind off the lake was cold. I pulled my jacket tighter. The wallet, I said. Preston brought me a wallet with my baby photo. Kept it 35 years, Vernon said. Every day. Couldn't claim you, couldn't know you, but I could carry your face. His breath caught, and his hand went to his chest. Not dramatic, just automatic. The way you touch something that hurts. You okay? I asked. Vernon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Congestive heart failure. 2 years into the diagnosis, the doctors read me numbers every month. And the numbers keep saying the same thing, the clock is running. If you've ever met your real parent for the first time at 35 and been told in the same breath that they're dying, you know there's no script for what comes next. Just the terrible math of counting backwards from goodbye. How long? I asked. They don't put it in months. Just percentages and probabilities. But Preston said you needed to know now, before Winston made his move at that party. Because if you found out after I was gone, you'd spend the rest of your life with questions and no one to answer them. Vernon looked at me finally, those green-gray eyes meeting mine. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. For not fighting. For letting you grow up thinking you weren't wanted. For waiting until the clock was already running. The second chair creaked as I shifted, wood worn smooth in places and rough in others. A chair that had spent 3 decades waiting for the right person. Vernon had been keeping it ready. The clock was running, and we'd already lost so much time. Vernon talked more easily with something in his hands. A coffee mug, a fishing rod, anything to anchor him while the hard truths came out. That first Saturday, it was his coffee. He held it between both palms like it might escape, staring at the lake. Your mother gave me a choice, he said. But I need you to understand what came before it. He set the mug on the deck railing. 1986. You were 5 years old. I broke the plan. Just once. Drugstore birthday card, cartoon on the front, $5 inside. Signed, your friend Neil. I mailed it to your house. Vernon's hands tightened on the railing. 3 days later, your mother was in my office with the card in her hand. She'd pulled it from the mailbox before anyone saw. Sat down across from my desk like we were negotiating a contract. What did she say? I asked. Vernon looked at me. Those green-gray eyes tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. She wasn't cruel about it. That's what I need you to understand. She was terrified. Terror in a mother who cheated comes out organized, not loud, not violent, just methodical in building the walls that keep the evidence contained. She put the card on my desk, Vernon said, and gave me a choice. Word for word, you can watch her grow up from a distance, or you can read about her in Christmas letters. Choose. The wind off the lake had picked up. Colder now. What does distance mean? I asked. Upper deck at graduations. Back row at school plays. Never closer than 20 feet. No cards. No contact. No claims. In exchange, she wouldn't build the wall so high I'd never see over it. Vernon's breath caught again, hand going to his chest, so I kept the oath, he said quietly. And I kept writing the cards. I just stopped mailing them. How many cards? 34 more. You'll get them when... I didn't finish. Didn't need to. An invisible father is worse than an absent one. You spend your whole life looking for him in doorways and upper decks, never knowing he was always there just outside your sightline. She let you watch, I said. But you couldn't be seen. That was the deal. And you took it. Vernon looked at me with something between regret and defiance. I took it because the alternative was losing you completely. You want me to apologize for choosing crumbs over starvation? I didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a while, watching the water. Come back next Saturday, Vernon said finally. Bring coffee and those donuts you like. We've got 35 years to cover, and I don't know how many Saturdays we have left. The following Saturday, I drove back with coffee and a dozen glazed donuts from the place on 72nd Street. Dawn was just breaking when I arrived. Vernon was on the dock with 2 fishing rods and a tackle box that looked older than I was. You fish? He asked. Not since I was 8. Good. Neither do I, really. But it gives us something to do with our hands while we talk. We cast lines into water, so still it looked like glass. No bites. Didn't matter. Fall of 2010, Vernon said after a while. You were a sophomore. Came up short on tuition. $4,800. I went still. Rod forgotten in my hands. The Buckeye Futures Hardship Fund, I said. Vernon nodded. There is no fund. There's a P.O. box and a lawyer's letterhead. There was only ever one recipient. The water blurred in front of me. You? Me. Vernon set down his rod and opened the tackle box. From under the lures and line, he pulled a white envelope, edges soft from handling. You wrote a thank you letter, he said. Dear benefactor, I've read it more times than any contract I ever signed. I handed it to me. I recognized my handwriting immediately. Careful, grateful. The penmanship of a 20-year-old who understood someone had just saved her from dropping out. Dear benefactor, I don't know who you are, but you kept me in school when I thought I was done. I promise I won't waste this. Thank you for believing in someone you've never met. Gratefully, Saskia Mercer. If you've ever thanked a stranger for saving your life and found out 30 years later that the stranger was your father, keeping watch in secret, you know that gratitude and grief are sometimes the exact same feeling. How did you know I needed it? I asked. Francis mentioned it in passing at a company function. Worried tone. I had Preston set up the paperwork by Monday. Vernon reeled in his line slowly, not catching anything, just needing the motion. Every scholarship application, he said. Every graduation I attended from the cheap seats in the back. Every birthday unmarked by my voice, but not by my vigilance. I was there, kiddo. I was always there. I held that envelope in my hands, my handwriting at 20, careful and grateful to a benefactor I'd never meet. Vernon had carried my words in his tackle box for 16 years, the way other fathers carry school photos in their wallets. Every anonymous gift, every attended graduation, every birthday card written but never sent. It had all been love with nowhere to land. We're running out of Saturdays, I said. Vernon looked at me with those eyes we shared. I know, he said, but neither of us knew just how few we had left. The phone rang Saturday afternoon, the day before our scheduled meeting. The day I was supposed to bring donuts. I answered on the second ring, expecting Vernon's voice, maybe telling me to bring extra coffee. Instead, a woman I didn't know. This is Nadine Thornton, she said, her voice folding mid-sentence. I'm calling about Vernon Gallagher. Nadine Thornton, Vernon's office manager for 30 years. A woman in her mid-60s who'd answered his phones and kept his calendar and knew more about his life than anyone still living. I'm so sorry, honey, she said. He passed this afternoon. The words arrived in order past. Afternoon. Sorry, but they didn't make sense yet. Where? I asked. On the deck in that chair facing the water. His heart just finished. I sat down on my couch without deciding to sit. When? Around 2. He'd been reading. The book was still open when the neighbor checked on him. 2 in the afternoon. I'd been at the grocery store at 2, deciding between glazed and chocolate donuts for tomorrow morning. "Thank you for calling," I said, "because that's what you say when someone tells you your father died before you got the chance to know him." The reminder on my phone stayed where it was. Lake Bring Donuts. I couldn't delete it. I still haven't. Some reminders you keep not because you forgot to delete them, but because deleting them would mean accepting that the person who was supposed to be there will never arrive. The funeral was Thursday, at a church Vernon never attended. I sat in the last row on the left, the same seat Vernon had chosen at my graduation, my college ceremony. Probably every moment of my life he'd witnessed from the necessary distance. Far corner, easy exit, close enough to see. The church filled with people I didn't know. Business partners, subcontractors, suppliers. Men in dark suits who'd worked with Vernon for decades and never knew he had a daughter. Winston sat in the front row with Francis and Valentina, the bereaved business partner performing public grief. The eulogy was Winston's. Of course it was. He stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, hands gripping the edges like he was steadying himself, and delivered the practiced sorrow of a man who'd spent 40 years next to someone he'd never really seen. "Vernon Gallagher was my brother in every way that mattered," Winston said. "My conscience. Half of everything I built. The man who checked my math and kept me honest and never asked for credit he deserved." The room murmured warm assent. Heads nodded. Someone in the third row wiped their eyes. Grief has seating charts. The family up front in their coordinated sorrow. The real mourners in the back rows, where love that was never allowed to be public sits silent and invisible. Winston's eyes swept the church, practiced pause, surveying the congregation, building the moment. They swept past me and stopped, half a second. A hitch in the cadence of a speech he could have delivered in his sleep. He saw me. He knew I knew. Then the moment passed, and Winston continued about partnership and legacy, and the man who'd built half an empire and lived quietly and died alone looking at a lake. Not alone, I thought. He died waiting for his daughter to bring donuts. After the service, the family formed a receiving line in the church narthex. Winston, Francis, Valentina, positioned to accept condolences from people who'd lost a business associate, but not a father. I waited on the steps outside, watching people file past offering their sympathies to the wrong family. Nadine found me there. She was small, gray-haired, with the kind eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years managing a man's professional life and understanding the personal one he couldn't speak about. "You're Saskia," she said. Not a question. "Yes." Nadine pressed my hand in both of hers, leaned close. "He kept a photo in his wallet," she whispered. "Every day for as long as I knew him. Pulled it out sometimes when he thought no one was looking." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Ask Mr. Whitfield to show you which one." She didn't wait for my answer. Just patted my hand once more and walked back into the church where the family I'd grown up in was accepting sympathy for a loss they didn't understand. The photo Preston had brought to my apartment. The baby in the faded plastic window. The hospital bracelet just visible at the edge. Vernon had carried my face against his chest every single day, while I grew up wondering why I was never enough. If you've ever sat at someone's funeral, knowing you were their child, but nobody in that room would ever call you that, you understand that there are worse things than being unloved. Being loved in secret is one of them. I had known Vernon for 14 days. Really known him. 14 days between finding his name in a visitor log and the phone call that ended everything. 14 days of Saturdays and fishing and coffee and truth. 35 years of silence before that. And in that church, watching Winston perform grief for a man whose daughter he'd spent 35 years erasing. I understood something Vernon had been trying to tell me without saying it directly. He'd left me more than Saturdays and donuts and truth. He'd left me proof, and proof, in the right hands, was about to cost Winston everything he'd built on silence. The proof arrived Tuesday morning in Preston Whitfield's law office, delivered in the form of legal language and a wooden box. Preston sat behind his desk with walnut shelves and a green banker's lamp, a manila folder open in front of him. "There will be no dramatic reading, Ms. Mercer," he said. "That's the movies. What Mr. Gallagher left, he left through a living trust. No probate court, no waiting, no public file. And," he gave me a measured look, "no family audience. Meaning? Meaning it transfers directly. Today. Winston won't know until you decide to tell him." Preston stood up to read the operative language, an old-school habit, apparently, for this one part because Vernon had asked him to read it aloud. "I hereby transfer to Saskia Calloway Mercer, my daughter, the following. My 40% ownership of Gallagher Mercer Construction, currently valued at approximately $140 million, the lake house property at McConaughey, and all remaining personal assets as detailed in Schedule A. My daughter." Read aloud at 11 in the morning by a man standing up to say it. 35 years, and it was the first time in my life I had been claimed out loud. There are inheritances measured in money, and there are inheritances measured in being called what you actually are. Being named out loud as someone's daughter is worth more than 40% of anything. 40%, I said when I could speak. "That makes me second largest shareholder," Preston said. "Winston owns 60. You own 40. The math is simple, the implications are not." He sat back down, slid a document across the desk. He anticipated challenges. Incapacity, undue influence, the standard attacks on a dying man's decisions. So, 1. My call log shows. He phoned to begin amending his estate plan. March 23rd, 2 days before we ever met you. Legally impossible that you influenced him. Preston tapped the document. 2. A letter from his cardiologist dated the week of signing, confirming mental capacity and testamentary intent. 3. A video recording of the signing ceremony with 2 witnesses, both of whom will testify. He was lucid, uncoerced, and insisted on every word. He slid another stapled document across, and for a draft from 2014. Same beneficiary, same words. He carried the intention for 12 years. I looked at the 2014 draft. The language was nearly identical. Saskia Calloway, Mercer, my daughter. 12 years ago, when I was 23 and had no idea Vernon Gallagher was anything more than Winston's quiet business partner. "I was very thorough," Preston said. He said you of all people would appreciate thorough. Legal protections are like foundation work, boring, invisible, but the difference between a building that stands and one that collapses when the wind changes. "Winston will challenge it," I said. "Of course, but he'll lose." Vernon made sure of it. Preston opened a drawer and removed a wooden box, maybe 10 inches square, the kind that holds cigars or letters or things a man keeps private. "The personal property," he said. "He was going to give you this himself on the 12th, the day he died, the day I was supposed to bring donuts." Preston set the box in front of me and stepped back, giving me space. I opened it. The wallet photo on top, worn round at the corners from 35 years against Vernon's chest. My infant face looking up from faded plastic. Underneath, My 2013 graduation program, with my name underlined in blue ink. The Dear Benefactor letter I'd written at 20, folded and soft from rereading, and at the bottom, banded by decade in cracked rubber bands, 35 birthday cards, all addressed to my childhood home on Mapler Crest Drive. None of them mailed. I pulled the first one from the stack. March 12th, 1991. A cartoon duck on the front, inside, in Vernon's careful handwriting, "You are one today." I stood across the street from the party with a gift I couldn't bring in. You wore a yellow dress and you hated your shoes. Whoever you turn out to be, I already like her. N for Neil. The name he'd used on the card, Francis intercepted 5 years later. I opened the second one. Age 2. A cartoon bear. You learned 17 words this year. I kept a list. My favorite was why. Keep asking it. The third. Age 3. You fell off the swing at Elmwood Park and didn't cry until you got to your mother. Brave in public, honest in private. That's good math. 34 more sealed envelopes, banded by decade-like evidence, like proof of attendance, like love measured in annual ritual. If you've ever held 35 years of love in a stack of sealed envelopes, you know that some fathers leave college funds and some leave proof that you were thought of. Every single birthday, even when they couldn't be there to say it. At the bottom, the last one. Dated this year, March 12th, 2024. The ink barely 2 months old. I ran my thumb along its edge. I didn't open it. Not there. Some envelopes you have to earn a room for. Thank you, I said to Preston. He nodded once, professional and kind. I left his office with the wooden box under my arm and the knowledge that I now owned 40% of Gallagher Mercer Construction, second largest shareholder. Winston's new partner, whether he wanted one or not. Vernon hadn't just left me money, he'd left me leverage, and I was about to find out exactly how much Winston was willing to destroy to keep his version of the family intact. Winston's response arrived at 11:43 that night. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, screen lighting the dark bedroom. Voicemail from a number I'd known my entire life. I let it finish before I listened. Winston's voice came through, controlled and cold, the tone he used in contract negotiations when he'd already decided to walk away. Saskia, I've retained Feldman and Associates to challenge Vernon's arrangements. This is clearly a case of undue influence over a dying man. You took advantage of someone in a compromised state, and we will prove it in court. This will take years. It will cost you everything you think you've gained. You have no idea what you've started. The message ended. I played it again. Then a third time. The calculation beneath the anger was what scared me. Not the threat itself, but the fact that he'd already made calls, already hired attorneys, already built the strategy to destroy what Vernon had given me. When had Winston learned to sound so much like Vernon? I saved the voicemail and added it to a folder I'd started calling defense. Then I lay awake until dawn, listening to the sound of my own breathing and wondering if Vernon had known exactly how this would go. Valentina's text arrived at 8 the next morning. Coffee? Our old spot? Need to talk. V. I met her at 10 at the cafe near the country club. The one where we'd met for lunch when I still thought we were sisters, who just didn't understand each other. Valentina was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a latte she hadn't touched. She looked worn in a way makeup couldn't quite hide shadows under her eyes, tension in her shoulders. Thanks for coming, she said when I sat down. What do you want, Valentina? She flinched at my tone. I wanted to see you, to talk. This whole thing with Vernon's will has been a surprise, I finished, for all of us. We sat in silence while I ordered coffee I didn't want. Valentina's hands trembled slightly on her cup. Winston's upset, she said finally. You have to understand, he built that company with Vernon 40 years. And now Vernon left me half of what was his, I said. Not half of what Winston built, half of what Vernon built. Valentina reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored, expensive stationery. She slid it across the table. Winston and I want to help with your transition, she said. A gift, no strings. I opened it. A check for $2 million. To help you get settled, Valentina continued. Start fresh somewhere. You could travel, buy a house, anything you want. We just think Winston thinks it would be better for everyone if we kept the business side of things separate from family. Her hand trembled as she reached for the sugar. The movement knocked her purse, and a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. A receipt. Tiffany & Co. $47,000. Dated 2 days after Vernon's funeral. The receipt showed $47,000 for jewelry. 2 days after the funeral. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Valentina's face went pale. That's not, she started. Not what? I asked quietly. Valentina's composure cracked. You don't understand what you're doing to this family. Winston has worked his entire life for that company. You just showed up with a piece of paper and think you deserve 40% of everything? Vernon thought I deserved it, I said. Vernon wanted to punish us from the grave, Valentina said, her voice sharp now, the polished exterior falling away. He couldn't have you when he was alive, so he's using you now to hurt Winston. Can't you see that? I slid the check back across the table. I'm not for sale, I said. Valentina's eyes filled with something between anger and desperation. $2 million, Saskia. That's more than you'll make in your entire career. You could walk away from all of this. I could, I agreed, but I won't. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Set it on the table between us, screen facing up. The recording app was running. 12 minutes, 43 seconds. It's recording, I said. Valentina went white. You think you know your family until you see them try to buy your silence. Valentina grabbed her purse, the check, her coffee. You have no idea what you're getting into. This isn't about money. This isn't about Vernon's will. There are things you don't know. Things Vernon never told you about why he really left you everything. Then tell me, I said. Valentina stood, shaking. Ask your mother. Ask her what she did to make sure Vernon stayed away from you. Ask her what Winston knows that you don't. Then see if you still want to play this game. She left, heels clicking across the cafe floor, the check still crumpled in her hand. I sat alone with my phone recording silence, the receipt in my pocket, and Valentina's parting words hanging in the air like smoke. There are things you don't know. I stopped the recording and saved it next to Winston's voicemail in the defense folder. Valentina was right about one thing. I didn't know everything, but I was learning fast. The call from Leora came at 6. The next morning, she'd been at the office all night. You need to see this, she said without preamble. Get here now. I drove to the insurance office in yesterday's clothes, coffee burning my tongue, Valentina's warning still echoing in my head. There are things you don't know. Leora met me at her desk, eyes red-rimmed behind her glasses, surrounded by open files and 3 empty coffee cups. I was helping you build defense documentation, she said, pulling up a scanned image on her screen, cross-referencing company financial records against the dates you gave me, and I found this, a digitized payment record. March 1991. Mercer Industries wire transfer. Amount $198,500. Coded as consulting fee. Payee unlisted. That's the year I was born, I said. Exactly, Leora said. March, same month. And look at this. She pulled up a second screen showing server logs. Someone tried to delete this from the archive 2 weeks after Vernon died. The deletion failed because of our backup protocol, but they tried. Someone with company admin access. The amount, the year, the month, the attempted deletion. How do you process the idea that your father's insurance had a price tag? Can you print this? I asked. Already did. Leora handed me a folder. Time-stamped, authenticated, with the deletion attempt logged. Whatever this is, someone doesn't want you to find it. I drove straight to the bank and retrieved my birth certificate from the safety deposit box I hadn't opened in 10 years. The clerk, an older woman who'd worked there as long as I could remember, smiled when she saw me. Haven't seen you get this box in years, honey. I took it to a private room. The certificate was faded yellow. State seal embossed in the corner. Born March 12, 1991. Camden Valley Medical Center. Mother, Frances Tierney Mercer. Father, blank. Not Winston, blank. I sat in that small bank room with fluorescent lights humming overhead and let the pieces reorganize themselves into a truth I should have seen coming. I called Preston from the parking lot and asked him the question I'd been afraid to ask. The wire transfer, I said. $198,500, coded consulting fee, dated the same month I was born. What was it for? Preston was quiet for a moment. I can't confirm what I don't have documentation for, but I can tell you the trust language Vernon left behind refers to it once, in his own words, as the price of your father's silence. The price of your father's silence. Not my birth, my father's silence. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread in front of me. The $198,500 payment. The birth certificate with no father listed. The visitor log showing Vernon at the hospital before Winston ever arrived. My phone rang at 7 that evening. Unknown number. Ms. Mercer, this is Michael Brennan, Senior VP at Hartwick Capital. We're the firm in negotiations to acquire Gallagher Mercer Construction. Michael Brennan carried the careful authority of someone who made decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I know who you are, I said. Then you know we have a substantial interest in the company's stability. May I be direct? Please. We've done extensive due diligence, found irregularities, money moving in ways that don't match the paperwork. We believe Winston is leveraging the will dispute to tank this sale and retain control. I said nothing, waiting. The question is whether you're part of it, Michael continued, or whether you're an obstacle he's trying to remove. What makes you think I'm an obstacle? Because he's spending a lot of money trying to make you go away. And people don't spend money like that unless they're afraid of what you know. What do you want from me? I asked. A meeting before the shareholder vote. We need to understand the full situation. I have documentation, I said. Recordings, evidence. Of what? Bribe attempts, threats, financial irregularities. Michael was quiet for 3 seconds. Then we need clarity before we sign a $350 million deal with a company that might be committing fraud. Sometimes your enemy's enemy isn't your friend, but they might be your weapon. When? I asked. Thursday. Neutral location. You, me, our legal team. Bring everything you have, and if I don't, then we walk away from the deal. Winston keeps control of a company worth half what it should be, and you spend the next 5 years in litigation with no allies and limited resources. Your choice. I wasn't wrong. Thursday. I agreed. But I choose the location, and I bring my own attorney. Fair enough. Text me the address. I hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand, looking at the evidence spread across my table. The wire transfer that priced my father's silence. The birth certificate with no father listed. The visitor log with Vernon's name on it. The recording of Valentina trying to buy my silence. Winston's threatening voicemail. The buyer firm wanted my evidence. They suspected Winston's fraud went deeper than the will. They were willing to pay for the truth. I had 48 hours to decide whether to trust them. But the math was simple. Winston had the power, the money, and the lawyers. I had truth and evidence, and a dead father who'd left me leverage. And now I had buyers who needed to know if the company they were purchasing was built on lies. I texted Preston. Need you Thursday. 2 p.m. Client meeting. Bring everything. Then I texted Michael Brennan. An address a conference room. I'd reserve at a hotel where no one would recognize any of us. Valentina had warned me there were things I didn't know. She was right. But Winston didn't know what I'd found either, and that was about to become his problem. I didn't wait for Thursday. I went to see Frances that Saturday morning, the weekend before the shareholder meeting. She was folding laundry in the dining room of the house where I'd grown up. The same house where I'd spent 35 years, wondering why I was never enough. I placed the wallet on the table between us, my own wallet. The one Preston had first brought to my apartment. Worn brown leather, the kind from the early 90s with a clear plastic window. Inside it, a hospital bracelet I'd found tucked in Vernon's locked desk drawer at the lake house, in a folder he'd labeled with nothing but a date. March 12th, 1991. Frances's hands froze mid-fold, a pillowcase hanging limp between her fingers. Where did you find that? She asked. Vernon's desk, I said. Not a question anymore. You and Vernon. Not once. Not a mistake at a business dinner. However long it actually was, Frances set down the pillowcase carefully, hands trembling. The bracelet has my birth date on it, I continued. The same week Vernon signed in at the hospital wearing band 014. Family. You put him on that band, Mom, while you were still married to Winston. Frances sat down across from me. The laundry basket between us like a monument to domesticity built on lies. How much do you know? She asked quietly. Enough. You and Vernon had an affair while you were married to Winston. I was born from it. You went into labor 2 hours from home under your maiden name, so no one at Camden Valley would think to call this house. Frances's face went pale. What I don't know, I said, is why Winston kept me anyway. Frances looked at the wallet for a long moment. Because I begged him, she said finally. The night you were born, he drove through the dark not knowing. He walked into that hospital, and Vernon was already there, still in the room, still holding you. Winston didn't need anyone to tell him anything. He just knew. What did he say? Nothing. Not that night. He stood in the doorway and looked at Vernon holding his business partners. She stopped herself. Holding you. And he understood everything in about 4 seconds. So he could have walked away. He could have destroyed all of us, Frances said, looking at me with something between defiance and shame. The marriage, the partnership, the company, my name in this town. Instead, he made me a deal. He'd raise you as his. He'd never say a word to anyone, including you. And in exchange, Vernon would never come near either of us again, and Vernon would pay for that silence for as long as Winston wanted it paid for. That's the $198,500, I said. Not a payoff to make someone disappear. A payoff to make Winston stay. Vernon called it consulting fees for years, so no one would ask, Frances said. It was never about erasing you. It was the price of Winston's silence, paid to the man who actually earned the right to say daughter, and never once used it. I was his heir, I said. Winston's, on paper, legally, yes. In every way that mattered to this town, yes. But he never once looked at you and forgot, Frances said. He raised you as his own and hated you for needing to. Both things were true every single day. Frances folded her hands on the table, the same hands that had served me dinner and signed permission slips, and never once held me the way a grandmother holds a granddaughter. He knew from the first night, she said. Not years later. Not some slow discovery. The first night in that doorway, watching Vernon hold you like something breakable. My stomach dropped. 35 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 35 years, Frances confirmed. He never asked, just punished. Every birthday Vernon couldn't attend. Every graduation where Vernon sat in the back row. Every moment Vernon tried to be a father from a distance. Winston made sure you paid for it by making sure you never felt like you belonged. 35 years. Winston had been punishing me since the night I was born. You let him, I said. I begged him to keep you instead of leaving, Frances said. I don't know which was the worst thing I did. I stood up, taking the wallet with me. The shareholder meeting is in 4 days, I said. Winston's going to challenge the will. Try to take what Vernon left me. I know, Frances said. He's not going to win. Frances looked at me with something I'd never seen in her face. Before, not quite respect, but recognition. No, she said quietly. I don't think he is. I walked out of the house where I'd grown up invisible, where Winston had spent 4 decades making sure I knew I didn't belong, where Frances had built the walls that kept Vernon at a distance, and me in the dark. Winston didn't just resent me for inheriting the company. He'd spent 35 years married to the choice that broke him. And I was the proof he saw every morning at breakfast. And by accepting Vernon's inheritance, I'd handed him the perfect weapon. The shareholder meeting was in 4 days. I had 96 hours to decide whether to expose Winston's decades of calculated cruelty or use it as leverage to make sure he never hurt anyone again. The conference table at Preston's office could hold 30 documents. I had 47. It was 9 at night, 12 hours before the shareholder meeting, and I was laying out everything I'd found in chronological order. Not the order I'd discovered them, the order they'd happened. March 1991. The hospital bracelet. Faded plastic with a number I'd memorized. 044. The visitor log showing. Vernon signed in at 9:14 p.m., never signed out. The birth certificate with mother listed as Frances Tierney Mercer, father blank. March 1991. The payment record, $198,500, consulting fee, no payee listed. The price of my father's silence, April 2024. Vernon's trust, dated 2 weeks before his death. The wallet with my baby photo worn round at the corners, May 2024. The recording of Valentine's attempt. The $47,000 jewelry receipt. Winston's threatening voicemail. Preston photographed each arrangement with a professional camera, making sure the sequence was documented. This is a timeline, not an accusation, he said, studying the layout. That's good. I want them to see what they did without me saying it, I said. Let the evidence prosecute, Preston agreed. Evidence is a mirror. You can't argue with your own reflection. Preston sat across from me, hands folded on the conference table. The strategy, he said, is presentation without explanation. You lay out these documents in order. You state the dates and the facts. No interpretation. No accusations. Just, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And when Winston objects, let him. When people panic, they confess. We just need to create the conditions for panic. What if he stays silent? Preston smiled slightly. Then Valentina won't. She's already tried to buy you once. She's afraid. Afraid people make mistakes. I thought about Valentina's trembling hands, the receipt that fell from her purse, her eyes when I'd placed the phone on the table recording. Winston will stay controlled, I said. He's good at control. In private, yes, but not in front of witnesses. Not in front of buyers who hold a $350 million deal. Not when his entire identity as the legitimate heir is being challenged by documentation he can't refute. Preston pulled out a yellow legal pad. The buyers will be there, he continued. Michael Brennan confirmed this afternoon. They want to observe before finalizing the acquisition. Which means Winston has an audience he needs to impress, so he'll defend himself, I said. Exactly. And defense requires explanation. Explanation requires talking. The more he talks, the more he reveals. The more he reveals, the more holes appear in his story. How do you stay silent when your whole life has been about proving you deserved to exist? What if I can't do it? I asked. What if I freeze? What if I start defending myself or explaining or, then you look at this, Preston said. He wrote on the yellow legal pad in black marker, large letters, then underlined twice, let them talk. He tore off the page and slid it across the table. Put this in your pocket, he said. When you feel yourself wanting to explain, to defend, to justify, take it out and read it. Every second they talk is a second they incriminate themselves. Every word they say, trying to explain away the evidence, is another piece of rope. I folded the note and put it in my jacket pocket. The sequence matters, Preston continued, gesturing to the timeline we'd built. Start with the hospital bracelet. Let them see the number. Then the visitor log with Vernon's signature. Then the payment. Each piece builds on the last. They'll say Vernon manipulated me. They will. Let them. Because then you show the 2014 draft of the trust, 12 years before he died. Same beneficiary. Undue influence requires proximity. You can't influence someone 12 years before you meet them. Preston stood and walked to the evidence, touching each piece lightly. The recording of Valentina's bribe attempt, that's last, after everything else, because that shows consciousness of guilt. People don't try to buy silence unless there's something to be silent about. And Winston's voicemail? Same. It shows he went on offense immediately. Didn't grieve Vernon. Didn't question the arrangement. Just hired lawyers within hours and threatened years of litigation. That's not confusion. That's fear. The note in my pocket weighed nothing, but it felt like armor. 9 a.m., Preston said, checking his watch. You'll present for 20 minutes, then silence. Complete silence. No matter what they say, what they accuse, what they threaten. You've said your piece. The evidence has said its piece. After that, it's their turn to talk. And if they don't take the bait, Preston smiled. They will. Because Winston has spent 35 years making you defend your existence. He won't be able to resist making you defend it one more time. Except this time, you won't. And that silence, that refusal to engage, will drive him to fill it. I looked at the 47 pieces of evidence spread across the conference table. Hospital records, financial documents, trust paperwork, recordings, A lifetime of secrets laid bare in chronological order. Let them talk, I said quietly. Let them talk, Preston agreed. I walked out of his office at midnight with the evidence folder under my arm and the note folded in my pocket. The shareholder meeting started at 9 a.m., 8 hours to decide whether I could stay silent, long enough to let my family destroy themselves. 8 hours until everything changed. 17 people sat around the boardroom table when Winston asked me to sign away my inheritance. I'd arrived early, laid out my documents in order, and sat in the chair Vernon would have chosen second from the end on the left, clear sightline to the door. Preston sat beside me, briefcase closed, face neutral. Winston stood at the head of the table in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, flanked by Valentina in pearls and Francis in navy. Michael Brennan and his acquisition team occupied the far end, 3 men in dark suits taking notes, recording everything. Conrad Gallagher, Vernon's longtime business partner and co-founder of Gallagher Mercer Construction, sat alone halfway down the table. A man in his late 60s who'd built half the company and valued fairness over family politics, he looked at me once and nodded. Before we begin official business, Winston said, sliding a document across the table toward me, I'd like to suggest a simple administrative solution, a proxy, so the adults in the room can proceed with business matters. Valentina nodded supportively. Francis stared at her lap. I'm sure you understand this is beyond your expertise, Saskia, Winston continued, voice smooth as contract negotiations. The company needs experienced leadership during this transition. It's really for the best, Valentina added. Don't you think? You know that moment when the room realizes the underestimated person holds all the cards? I stood up. I'd like to present some documents first, I said. I placed my own wallet in the center of the conference table. Worn brown leather, clear plastic window, the kind from the early 90s. Then I opened my folder and began reading in the flat voice I used for insurance claims, no emotion, just facts. March 12, 1991. Patient, Francis Tierney Mercer. Camden Valley Medical Center. Payment method, cash. $847, admitted under her maiden name. I slid the hospital admission form toward the center. March 12, 1991. Mercer Industries. Wire transfer. $198,500. Coded as consulting fee. Payee. Unlisted. Wired the same week. Another document joined the first. March 12, 1991. Visitor log. Vernon Gallagher signed in 9:14 p.m. Band number 044. Family. Timeout. Blank. Winston's face went from confident to corpse white in the space of 3 sentences. This is completely, he started. I'm not finished, I said. I didn't look at him. I looked at Michael Brennan, at Conrad, at the acquisition team taking notes. April 3, 2024. Living trust executed by Vernon Gallagher, witnessed and notarized. Primary beneficiary, Saskia Calloway Mercer. Relationship listed, daughter. I slid Vernon's trust document across the table. My birth certificate. Mother, Francis Tierney Mercer. Father. Blank. The room had gone completely still. May 2024. Recorded conversation in which Mrs. Valentina Mercer offered me a check for $2 million to, quote, help with my transition, unquote. I declined. The recording is timestamped and authenticated. Valentina's face drained of color. That's you can't, she stammered. I haven't played it, I said. I'm simply noting its existence. Preston stood. There's one more document, he said. Notarized April 3rd, 2024. 2 weeks before Mr. Gallagher's death. Witnessed by myself and my paralegal. Vernon Gallagher's final statement regarding his estate and his daughter. He walked around the table, placing a copy in front of each person. 17 copies, one for everyone present. "I'll give you a moment to read," Preston said. I watched them pick up the pages. Watched 17 people read Vernon's words in his own handwriting, notarized and witnessed and undeniable. Francis read with shaking hands. Valentina's eyes filled with tears. Winston sat frozen, staring at the first paragraph. Michael Brennan read carefully, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to something harder. Conrad read slowly, then set the paper down and looked at me with something like recognition. The affidavit laid it all out, the affair with Francis, the pregnancy, hidden 2 hours from home. The night Winston walked into that hospital room and understood everything without being told. The deal Winston struck to raise Vernon's daughter as his own and never say a word, in exchange for a price paid in silence for 35 years. Vernon's cowardice in staying quiet, in watching from a distance instead of claiming what was his. And the final paragraph, the one I'd read 20 times in Preston's office. "She is my daughter, Saskia Calloway Mercer. I abandoned her to protect a company that should have been hers from birth. I leave her everything I own, not because she asked for it, but because it was always hers. I failed her as a father. I will not fail her as a legacy." Silence is louder than confession. When 17 people stop breathing at once, Francis whispered something that might have been, "Oh, Vernon." Winston said nothing. His hands were flat on the table, white-knuckled, the proxy he'd prepared sitting forgotten in front of him. Valentina stared at me across the table with something between horror and understanding. Michael Brennan exchanged looks with his team. One of them was still taking notes. I sat down and folded my hands on the table. The note in my pocket said, "Let them talk." 17 heads stayed down, reading and rereading Vernon's final statement. No one looked at me. No one looked at Winston. The clock on the wall read 9:17 a.m. The strategy depended on silence now, on letting them fill it with their own destruction. Frances stood first, her chair scraping the silence like a gunshot. She didn't look at me. She looked at the affidavit in her hands, at Vernon's words typed and notarized and undeniable. "Everything in that affidavit is true," she said, voice steady in the way people sound when they've rehearsed something terrible. "Vernon and I had an affair in 1990 while I was married to Winston. Saskia is Vernon's biological daughter, not Winston's." Valentina stared at her hands. Michael Brennan set down his pen. "Winston knew the night she was born," Francis continued. "He walked into that hospital room and found Vernon already there, holding her. He didn't need me to explain anything. I begged him not to leave. I told him I'd do anything, give up Vernon completely, raise her as his, let the world believe she was his daughter." He agreed. On one condition: Vernon would pay for that silence, for as long as Winston wanted it paid. She finally looked at me. "I made Vernon choose," she said, "between claiming you and keeping the company, the partnership, everything he'd spent his life building. He chose to stay silent and let Winston raise you. And then he waited until he was dying to undo everything I'd built to protect this family." Conrad Gallagher stood up, closed his folder, looked at Winston with something between disgust and pity. "I've heard enough," Conrad said. I walked out, didn't look back. 30 years of partnership ended in 30 seconds. The silence that followed Francis's confession lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then Winston exploded. "You think I didn't know?" His voice cracked across the boardroom, all the controlled corporate smoothness gone. I knew the night she was born. I walked into that hospital room, and my business partner was standing there holding my wife's daughter like she was already his. I didn't need anyone to do math for me. He stood, hands flat on the table, face red. "I raised his daughter as mine," Winston said, the words sharp and ugly, and expected me to pretend I didn't see him every single day at the office. Every groundbreaking, every Christmas party he skipped, so he wouldn't have to watch me raise what should have been his. "Winston," Valentina whispered. "Stop talking. Why?" Winston turned on her. "They already know. They all know now. Vernon made sure of that with his dying confession." He pointed at me. "I gave her my name," he said. "Every scrap of legitimacy she has, every dollar of stability, every year of my life spent pretending. And now she gets 40% of the company I built while Vernon played father from the shadows? How many years can you hold poison before it destroys you from the inside?" "I stayed," Winston continued, voice dropping to something almost conversational, almost reasonable. 35 years married to the woman who did this to me, raising the proof of it under my own roof. Because the alternative was losing everything I'd built with the man who did it to me. Michael Brennan's phone was out, recording, and then he left her everything. Winston said, 40%, the lake house, all of it. Like 35 years of me raising his daughter meant nothing compared to 9 months he spent with my wife. "Winston," Francis said quietly. "Sit down." "No," he said. "They want the truth? Here's truth. Vernon Gallagher was a coward who couldn't own his mistakes. And his biggest mistake," he looked at me, "just walked in here with a lawyer and a stack of papers and thinks she's earned something she was handed by a guilty conscience. Preston's strategy had been perfect. Let them talk. Let them destroy themselves." I waited until Winston finished, until he sat down, breathing hard, until the room went silent again. Then I spoke in the same flat voice I'd used to present the evidence. "I have 5 terms," I said. "They're non-negotiable." I pulled out a typed document Preston and I had prepared. 1. Mr. Winston Mercer retires at closing. 0 severance. 0 consulting fees. 0 future role in company operations. Winston's face went white. 2. The acquisition proceeds as negotiated with Hartwick Capital. All terms agreed upon with Mr. Gallagher remain in effect. Michael Brennan nodded once. 3. I retain the full 40% ownership Vernon transferred to me, plus all personal assets including the lake house. 4. Mrs. Valentina Mercer will receive a one-time payment of $500,000 in exchange for signing a confidentiality agreement regarding all matters discussed here today. Valentina looked up, surprised. 5. All contact with me ceases immediately. No calls, no legal challenges, no public statements. If any of these terms are violated, the recording of the attempted bribe and today's testimony becomes public record. Silence is a contract when the alternative is total ruin. Preston stood. "Do we have agreement?" he asked. Winston sat frozen, destroyed by his own words before 17 witnesses. "Mr. Mercer?" Preston prompted. Winston said nothing. "That's a yes," I said. Michael Brennan closed his folder. "We'll proceed with the acquisition. Thank you for the clarity, Ms. Mercer." The meeting ended. People stood, gathered papers, filed out in careful silence. Francis left first, not looking at anyone. Valentina followed, dabbing her eyes. Winston sat alone at the head of the table, staring at nothing. I walked out with Preston, evidence folder under my arm. Vernon's note still folded in my pocket. The strategy had worked perfectly. Let them talk, and they'd destroyed themselves. I'd won. But winning felt nothing like I'd imagined. It felt like standing in the ruins of a house that burned down with everyone I'd ever known inside, and realizing too late that I'd been the one holding the match. 3 weeks after this meeting, I signed my full legal name for the first time, without hesitation. Saskia Mercer Gallagher. The ruins were still there. I'd helped build them, but I was done apologizing for existing. Preston's office, same conference room where I'd laid out 47 pieces of evidence. This time, it held closing documents for the sale of Gallagher Mercer Construction to Hartwick Capital. Purchase price, $350 million. My pen touched the signature line, Saskia Mercer Gallagher, both names. Both sides of who I was. The daughter Winston raised to feel invisible, and the daughter Vernon loved from a distance. All 5 terms I'd dictated were honored in black and white. Winston retired effective immediately. 0 severance. 0 consulting fees. 0 future contact. The acquisition proceeded as negotiated. I retained Vernon's 40% and all personal assets. Valentina received $500,000 and signed a confidentiality agreement without argument. All harassment ceased. Preston slid the final document across. Worker pensions protected. Scholarship fund endowed. Company name preserved as Gallagher Mercer. The scholarship fund. $5 million in Vernon Gallagher's name. The monument he'd earned by finally telling the truth. Conrad Gallagher signed as the remaining partner, his signature firm and steady. He looked at me once and nodded. Vernon would have wanted this, he said. Then, after a pause, not the way it happened, but this outcome. Thank you, I said. Michael Brennan added his signature. We'll honor every commitment. You have my word. The meeting ended. Handshakes. Polite professional farewells. The kind of closure that happens in conference rooms with expensive lawyers and binding contracts. I walked out with my copy of the documents and the knowledge that I'd won everything Vernon wanted me to have. It felt like nothing at all. The word spread through Omaha. The way bad news always does in cities that pretend to be small towns quietly, carefully, in conversations that start with, "Have you heard?" No press release, no public scandal. Just 17 witnesses who'd been in that boardroom. And 17 witnesses was 16 more than Omaha needed to know everything. Michael Brennan's team mentioned complications with prior management in closed meetings with other business leaders. Country club members heard from someone who'd been there, or knew someone who'd been there, or had a friend whose husband worked with someone who'd been there. The story that spread was accurate enough. Winston had known for decades that Saskia wasn't Vernon's legitimate heir. Had spent 40 years punishing an innocent child for existing. Had tried to steal her inheritance. Had confessed it all in front of witnesses, including the buyers, his business partner, and his own mother. Preston's network brought him updates. He'd call, voice carefully neutral, and deliver them like case status reports. Conrad's not returning Winston's calls, Preston said one afternoon. Neither is anyone from the old board. Good, I said. You didn't want him arrested, Preston observed. No. I wanted him to feel what I felt. Invisibility, Preston said. You wanted him invisible. Yes, which is worse. Prison with visiting hours, or freedom where no one will see you. The reports kept coming through June. Winston and Valentina dropped from country club committees. No dramatic confrontation. Just names quietly removed from rosters, invitations that stopped arriving, old colleagues who didn't return calls. business contacts who were suddenly too busy. The careful recalculation of who mattered in Omaha's tight social circles, and the quiet consensus that Winston Mercer no longer did. Winston's name removed from the foundation board he'd chaired for 20 years. Not fired, not asked to resign. They just stopped scheduling meetings and eventually replaced him without announcement. They didn't fire him from the foundation, Preston told me. They just stopped scheduling meetings. By the time anyone noticed, there was a new chair, and Winston's name wasn't on the website anymore. No trial, I said. No charges. Just silence. Sometimes that's the cruelest sentence, Preston said. I was right. Winston got exactly what he'd given me for 35 years. The punishment of being seen, but never acknowledged. Present, but never belonging. The casual cruelty of erasure, dressed up as indifference. The irony was perfect. The satisfaction was hollow. You think revenge tastes sweet, but mostly it tastes like nothing at all. I sat in my apartment one evening in late June, with Vernon's wooden box on my coffee table. The 35 birthday cards, still mostly sealed. The Dear Benefactor letter I'd written at 20. The hospital bracelet with number 014, the last card, dated March 2024, sat on top. I still hadn't opened it. I'd won. Vernon's legacy was mine. Winston was destroyed. The company was sold. The scholarship fund would help students who needed it the way I'd needed it. I had everything I'd fought for, and I had no idea what to do with a life that wasn't about proving I deserved to exist. Outside my window, Omaha went on being Omaha. The city where Winston Mercer had once mattered and now didn't. Where Vernon Gallagher had built half a company and died with a wallet photo against his chest. Where Frances had spent 35 years, married to the silence she'd bought to keep me. Where I'd grown up invisible and fought my way into being seen, and now that I was seen, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. The envelope in my mailbox had Frances's handwriting. Precise, controlled, unmistakable. No return address. Just my name in that perfect Catholic school script that used to sign permission slips and Christmas cards before I knew whose daughter I really was. I opened it standing in the driveway. Inside was a second envelope, yellowed at the edges, postmarked December 1996. Addressed to Saskia Mercer. Care of Winston and Frances Mercer. The return address made my chest tighten. Vernon Gallagher. Kearney, Nebraska. My 7th birthday. The year I'd asked for a Tamagotchi and got encyclopedias instead. I sat in my car and opened the card with shaking hands. The front showed a cartoon puppy wearing a party hat. Inside, Vernon's handwriting. Blocky, careful. Happy 7th birthday, Saskia. I hope this year brings you everything that makes you smile. You deserve all the joy in the world. Below that, a $50 bill, creased from decades inside the card. He'd signed it. Someone who thinks you're wonderful. How many others has there been? How many birthdays had Vernon tried to reach me, only to have Frances intercept the evidence that someone beyond Winston's walls actually cared? My phone buzzed. A text from Frances. I have more. Coffee tomorrow, if you're willing. The greenhouse, 10 a.m. I understand if you're not. I stared at that message for 5 minutes. Then I typed back. I'll be there. The greenhouse was a place Frances used to take me after piano recitals. All white wicker and hanging ferns. The kind of spot where Omaha women met to discuss charity galas in voices that never rose above cocktail party level. She was already seated when I arrived, a cardboard box on the chair beside her. She looked smaller than she had at the shareholder meeting. Older. Her hands were folded on the table like she was praying. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. I sat across from her, said nothing. Francis pushed the box toward me. 35 years of cards. Gifts. He sent something every birthday, every Christmas. Sometimes just notes. I kept them all. I lifted the lid. Dozens of envelopes, organized by year. Small gifts. A silver bracelet. A snow globe. A paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with an inscription. For Saskia, age 12. Smart girls change the world. Why? My voice came out flat. Why keep them if you were just going to hide them from me? Francis's composure cracked. Because throwing them away felt like erasing you, and keeping them felt like someday I might be brave enough to tell the truth. Someday took 35 years, I know. She reached for her water glass, hands trembling. You were born at 6:47 in the evening. Vernon was already there, had been for hours. He signed the family band before Winston even knew you'd come early. I went still. Winston arrived a little after 9. I remember the exact moment the door opened, because Vernon was still holding you. She took a breath that sounded like it hurt. Nobody said anything for a long time. Vernon just stood there with you in his arms, and Winston stood in that doorway. And I lay in that bed watching both of them understand everything at once. The world seemed to tilt. You watched them see each other? Vernon held you like you were made of light, Francis said, and Winston watched him do it. Then Vernon looked at Winston through the nursery glass a few minutes later. When the nurse finally took you, he just nodded, once, and left. He never came back to that hospital. I couldn't breathe. You watched my father hold me for the first and only time in his life, and you still let Winston spend 35 years punishing me for existing? Yes. No excuse. No justification. Just that single, terrible word. Why? Francis's eyes filled. Because I was a coward. Because Winston was my life, and admitting what I'd done would have ended it. Because every year that passed made the lie bigger until I couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everything. She reached into her purse and set a small photo on the table. Black and white, slightly blurred. Vernon at the maternity ward window, holding a tiny bundle, his face creased with wonder and grief. The night nurse took this. She gave it to me the next morning. I've carried it for 35 years. I picked up the photo. Vernon looked young, broken, completely in love. I don't know how to forgive you, I said finally. I don't know if I ever will. I'm not asking you to. Francis's voice was barely a whisper. I just needed you to know that he loved you from the moment he saw you, and that I saw it. I witnessed it, and I chose wrong anyway. I stood, picking up the box, the photo, the evidence of a father who'd tried. The door isn't closed, I told her. But truth has to lead now, not comfort. If you want any kind of relationship with me, it starts with honesty. Real honesty. Not 35 years late. Francis nodded, tears finally spilling over. I understand. I walked out carrying 35 years of stolen love, and for the first time since this started, I felt something besides anger toward the woman who raised me. I felt grief. For both of us. I drove to Lake McConaughey on a Saturday morning with coffee still hot and a bag of donuts on the passenger seat. The box from Francis sat in the trunk. 35 years of intercepted love, and a question I couldn't stop asking. What did inheritance really mean when the money was spent and the war was won? The lake house key had arrived with Vernon's estate documents. Small, brass, attached to a wooden tag carved with a loon. I'd never been here. Vernon had invited me once during that first coffee, but he'd died before we could make the trip. The driveway wound through cottonwoods. The house was small. Cedar shingles weathered silver, stone chimney, windows facing the water. Nothing like the Mercer estate with its columns and the kind of landscaping that required a full-time crew. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Flannel shirt over a chair, reading glasses next to a Roosevelt biography, bookmark halfway through. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. I set the hospital photo on the mantel. Baby Saskia in Vernon's arms, hospital bracelet visible, his face unguarded. Francis had kept it hidden for 35 years. Now it sat above his fireplace, where it always should have been. I walked through the rooms. 2 bedrooms, both small. Vernon's clothes still in one closet. The second bedroom held a daybed with a quilt, a bookshelf full of classics, a desk facing the window. I kept it exactly the same, waiting. Every summer, he'd told me the lake house was too small for company. But standing in that second bedroom, with its carefully chosen books and desk positioned to watch sunrise over the water, I understood. It wasn't too small. It was waiting for me. The house didn't feel empty. It felt like it had been holding its breath. I went to pour the coffee I'd brought. That's when I saw the envelope on the counter, propped against the sugar bowl. My name in Vernon's handwriting. Postmarked March 2024. 2 weeks before he died. My birthday. I opened it with shaking hands. The card showed 2 chairs by water, side by side. Inside, his blocky script. Saskia, you asked why I stayed away. Wrong question. I never left. Every choice I made for 35 years was about keeping space for you until you were ready to claim it. The second chair was always yours. Love, Dad. Dad, in 35 years of intercepted cards, in our single coffee at Murphy's Landing, in the hospital visit Preston had told me about, Vernon had never used that word. Mr. Gallagher. Vernon. But never Dad. I pressed the card to my chest and cried, standing in his kitchen. For the first time since this, the tears weren't about anger or loss or decades stolen. They were about gratitude. He'd signed it Dad. He'd claimed me, even if only I would ever see it. Sometimes the people who love you most give you space instead of claiming you. And that's its own kind of devotion. I carried my coffee to the deck. The water stretched out calm and endless, catching late morning light like hammered silver. 2 Adirondack chairs faced the view, side by side. One was weathered gray, armrests worn smooth from years of use. The other was pristine. Same design, same cedar, but the varnish was perfect. Untouched. 35 years Vernon had sat in that first chair watching the water. 35 years he'd kept the second one waiting. Never let it weather. Never let anyone else sit in it. Kept it perfect for a daughter who didn't know she belonged here. I sat down in the second chair for the first time. It fit like it had been built for me. The angle of the back, the width of the arms, the way it faced the water, to catch sun without glare. Vernon had thought about this. Every summer he came here alone. He'd sat in his chair and looked at mine, and believed that someday I'd find my way home. A chair is just wood and varnish, until someone keeps it pristine for 35 years. And then it's a promise kept. The water was glass smooth. A loon called somewhere out on the lake. That wild, lonely sound that meant summer and freedom and space. Enough to breathe. I sipped my coffee and watched the light change. And I finally understood what Vernon had been trying to tell me. I'd spent months fighting for acknowledgement. For Winston to admit what he'd done. For Francis to confess. For Omaha to see me as legitimate. I'd measured inheritance in dollars and company shares and boardroom terms, but the real inheritance was this. A chair kept perfect. A house kept waiting. A father who'd never left. Even when I didn't know he was there. Some inheritances you measure in money. Some in chairs. I set my coffee on the armrest and looked out at the water. At the space Vernon had loved. At the life he'd built quietly while Winston built empires and Francis built lies. I never left. I said aloud to the lake, to the morning, to the father who'd kept a space for me even when I didn't know I needed it. The chair held me steady. The water caught the light. And for the first time in 35 years, I was exactly where I belonged. When I started this journey, I thought I wanted revenge. I wanted Winston to hurt the way he'd made me hurt for 35 years. I wanted Francis to pay for every lie. But somewhere between the boardroom confrontation and that chair waiting by the lake, I learned that the best revenge story isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming what was stolen. Here's what I learned. Inheritance isn't just about money or companies. It's about knowing someone kept a space for you, even when you didn't know they existed. Vernon taught me that love doesn't always look like proximity. Sometimes it looks like a chair, maintained for 35 years. And I believe God's timing brought me to that lake house exactly when I needed it most. Not when Vernon was alive to explain, but when I was finally ready to understand that belonging isn't something you fight for. It's something waiting for you to claim. If my revenge story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that what you thought was revenge turned into something else entirely? Please share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about family, truth, and finding peace when you least expect it. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. As a final note, while some details have been adjusted for storytelling purposes, the emotional truth and the lessons remain real.